Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Jim Spears. I am the Director of Arts South Dakota. I'm joined by my colleague, Andrew Reinhardt, who you'll hear from in a few minutes, and by our colleagues at the South Dakota Arts Council, Rebecca and Sarah. We're happy to be coming to you here from this August season, the summer season. A lot of times we have fewer webinars in the summer, but this summer we've had so many great topics to present that we've just kept the webinar series going all summer. So thank you to all for joining us and being part of the series here this summer. I'm excited about this webinar from a couple perspectives. One is just Arts South Dakota's strategic partnership with the South Dakota Arts Council and the work we do with that team in Pierre. And so we're very honored and fortunate that they've asked us to help present these webinars on some of their programs. And the other kind of perspective I have on today's webinar is that I've been, as an artist, as a musician, part of these programs that you'll hear about today, specifically the touring artist roster. As a trumpet player in several of the groups I perform with, I've had the opportunity to tour all throughout South Dakota because of that program, because of the support of the South Dakota Arts Council. You know, a lot of communities that we've visited are quite a ways away from home base here in Sioux Falls, and whenever you travel and you put on the miles, there's a cost involved. And so to make a performance by a 5-piece jazz quintet accessible to a smaller community in Western South Dakota, we need some additional financial support. And the Touring Arts roster has been one of those programs that has provided opportunities for both the artists and for the communities, the concert presenters, to come together and present shows in their hometowns that probably wouldn't be possible otherwise. I know many of our performances as the JAS Quintet and other ensembles would not have happened without the support of the South Dakota Arts Council. So those who are considering applying as an artist to either of the programs today, but especially the Touring Arts roster, just know it does open a lot of doors and provides the support needed to make trips across the state to visit communities you probably won't get to visit or to play in without that support. So I'm excited we get to highlight that program today. And thank you to Rebecca and to Sarah for sharing your time and your expertise today. And I'll turn it over to Andrew now to talk more about the webinar. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks so much, Jim. Definitely agree. It's amazing just how large our state is, and it's really hard to get from one corner to the other, and programs like this really help support both the artists and the communities to get further into our great creative state. So thank you again to Rebecca and Sarah from the South Dakota Arts Council for joining us today. And also a quick thank you to the South Dakota Arts Council, as well as the Bush Foundation, whose funding makes this webinar series possible throughout the year. For those of you who haven't been a part of one of our webinars before, there'll be a couple of question and answer times. We ask that if possible, please use the question and answer button that is down in your Zoom window. It helps us to keep track of all the questions as they're coming in, and then I'll bring those to our presenters. But also feel free to use the chat function to say hello to your fellow attendees or to any of our panelists today. And if you have any technical issues, you can also please use the chat, and I will help you as well as I can. So with that, I will go ahead and turn it over to Sarah and Rebecca.
Thank you, Andrew. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, and a big thanks to Arts South Dakota for hosting this webinar for us. We're currently accepting applications in both our touring arts and teaching artist programs. So that's what Sarah and I are going to talk about today. We're going to do just a quick and really big overview of the big differences between the two programs. And then I'll launch into an overview and application process for the teaching artist residency roster. We'll take some questions about that program, and then Sarah will launch into the touring arts program after that. And then we'll take questions about that one and more questions at the end, however many we can get answered here today. So I'll start with just a brief overview of the Artists in Schools and Communities program. This is referred to as our Teaching Artist Residency program, where teaching artists travel across South Dakota to lead creative educational residencies in schools and healthcare, human services centers, community settings. So these can really vary quite a bit depending on the community you're working in and the sponsoring organization. So sponsoring organizations apply for these grants to host artist residencies. This is not a direct grant to artists. So when you apply for this program, you're applying to be part of the roster. You're not applying for grant funds. The SDAC staff provides contracts and grant paperwork for this program to teaching artists and the sponsoring organizations in advance of the residencies. Requests for artists are submitted as part of the grant application from the sponsors. So that comes after this artist application process. This is a separate application process in which you will receive requests. Artists will then use an online system to schedule and confirm residency requests and dates. And artists are endorsed for this roster for a 3-year period. Then you would reapply at the end of that 3-year period if you would like to remain on the roster. After 2 successful applications, you just remain on the teaching artist roster until you want to leave, as long as your evaluations are satisfactory and as long as you're active in the program. And Sarah, could you share about the Touring Arts program with us?
Well, sure. So the Touring Arts, I'm Sarah Carlson, and the Touring Arts program is it's just a little bit like Artists in Schools and Communities, though it's not a residency program. So these are performances that may happen once or twice in one weekend in a community. So the artists or ensembles travel the state. They present at events and engagements where the host sponsor is a 501c3 nonprofit. That includes public schools, government entities, that's like your city, your county, or your state government or institution of higher learning. Eligible sponsoring organizations, they host the artist and ensemble. They have to pay at least 50% of the artist's fee, and the other 50% is paid through the Touring Arts grant that is awarded to the recipient. The Touring Arts Ensemble submits a signed contract to the South Dakota Arts Council for payment in advance of these events or engagements hosted by the sponsor organizations. And the artist or ensemble manages their own touring schedule and grant budget. So I like to, on that bullet point, note that this Touring Arts program is to supplement the touring that you already have going on, and is helpful when you're working with 501c3 nonprofits. Those artists and ensembles are endorsed to the roster with grant funding for a 2-year period and then may reapply. And that's all I have for that one.
Sarah, it looks like Rebecca froze. Do you want to just jump ahead and start with the Touring
sure.
Arts section, and then we can come back when she rejoins us?
You bet. I'll continue on with the Touring Arts.
Perfect.
And the mission of the Touring Arts program, like in the photos that you see here on the slide, it's statewide. It's ensuring access to quality arts programming for audiences across all regions of the state. And the Touring Arts program also supports opportunities for artists, arts producing organizations, schools, and audiences. So like Jim said, this helps to get the artist or ensemble further across the state and traveling, and also provides an incentive for those organizations to host them in their community, wherever they are in South Dakota. And so we'll move on to the next slide. And kind of like a little bit of a profile of a South Dakota Arts Council touring artist. We have Katie Dwyer. She's on our roster right now, and she's a music producer, singer, songwriter, and presenter. And a touring artist with the South Dakota Arts Council, that you're a professional artist, 18 years or older of any arts discipline, who travel the state performing or presenting. You can be an individual, you could be an ensemble, you could be from an arts organization or educational institution. We have a wide variety of those folks on our current roster. Touring artists also have a successful history of quality performing and presenting in South Dakota. And we have touring artists that are traveling all over the state, willing to travel outside of their home community to perform throughout the state of South Dakota. And so we'll move to the next slide. And so examples of the artists on a 2-year roster. These are professional artists who perform a show or present a workshop, not a series or residency. That's Rebecca's program. And we have singer-songwriters, and I mean, you can see the bullet list here. We have all kinds of disciplines of artists here, puppet makers. We have the symphony orchestras. We have university duos and trios. We even have an oboe and a bass combo. So they are traveling the state and performing communities as well. And one of the questions we'll have from applicants is, how are touring arts grant artists compensated? So the artist books engagements directly with eligible sponsor organizations. So they're getting out there and they're advertising themselves, they're marketing themselves and reaching out and finding out if they can get into someone's schedule. And then if they're a 501c3, they're using our South Dakota Arts Council touring arts contract that we will provide for you. And organizations that you work with to participate in this grant program must be registered 501c3 nonprofits within the state. And a couple of ways you can find eligible hosts and sponsors for this program would be using Arts South Dakota. Andrew and team have a fantastic directory on their website, artssouthdakota.org, and you look for that directory and it's got a list of venues and oh my good, there are all kinds of organizations that may be, most of them I should say, eligible to host touring arts programs. And you can also do a double check by looking on the IRS website under the charity search, and you can look them up to make sure that they're a registered 501c3 nonprofit. Number 2, the host and sponsor pays 50% or more of the artist's negotiated performance fee for the day of the event. And after the event, the South Dakota Arts Council pays the artist the remaining percentage out of the touring artist grant budget. And as you're looking through these, you may have some questions. But number 3, both entities sign this document. The artist submits it to us, and then the artist receives a check from the South Dakota Arts Council. And this is a sample of the touring artist application profile. So some of the things that you're going to want to think about gathering as you are getting ready to apply for the touring arts grant would be your artist statement. And that's just an explanation of your work or your ensemble's work, sharing your goals and objectives for sharing your work with South Dakotans across the state. This grant is like you are an investment to us in getting quality arts programming across the state. So keep that in mind. In the narrative, which is the lengthy part of the application, you'll be including your artwork and how you describe that, the management of how you manage a tour successfully, professionally, the logistics of how do you get your group and your performance on stage, off stage, how you travel, and also any other programming you might have available beyond just a performance. Sometimes you may have some kind of a class you can also share with before or after that show. We'll move on to the next slide. And some of the required application materials that you're going to want to gather to demonstrate a successful record of touring relative to the work you propose to do in this program. So some of the things you're going to want to gather is the promotional materials. So that would include brochures or posters, direct mail, programs or press releases about you and your artwork and things that you've done in communities. You could also include links to audio or video files or websites that talk and things that have helped promote you and your artwork. And also those support materials. These are evaluations or recommendations from past venues that you've worked with. These are letters of recommendation, critiques, reviews, or links again to audio or video files or websites that are support materials that can justify the success of your program. And that's kind of like proof for the reviewers to see that you do have a high quality program. And I was talking about that narrative is kind of like the bulk of that application. In the narrative, this slide kind of breaks it down. So we have artwork, management, logistics, and programming. And we kind of break those down. What is the artwork? We'd like to have you describe yourself to a potential sponsor by listing and describing the main programming you plan to offer. We'll move to management. You can describe your ability to handle a tour or program arrangements. It's a lot. It is a lot, and Jim and Andrew have been doing this for a long time as well. And it's how do you budget for a tour, especially when you've got a group of people, or maybe you're meeting up with other artists to perform for an event. How you calculate the associated costs to come up with a negotiated fee to work with that venue is a really important thing to put into your grant application. The logistics, again, how you manage with your sound amplification, lighting needs, any technical requirements for your performance. And then again, with the programming, listing and describing any additional programming or services, if applicable. It's not mandatory, but just to keep that in mind. And then we finally come to how the applicants are scored. So all applications are reviewed by a grant panel and scored based on the following qualifications. We've got 3 here for the touring arts: the quality of artistic work, the indication of exceptional talent within the art form, a complete description of your idea of your touring program, and your ability or potential to book a successful tour. And those are scored by a grant panel that's not staff, but a review panel. And I'll just leave it right here for questions if anyone does have any questions about the Touring Arts Grant.
Well, so far, no questions have come in. Oh, here we go. So one question from Steve in Aberdeen. So to clarify, this grant is only eligible if they're working with a 501c3 organization, correct? So 501, other presenters that are not 501c3s would not be eligible to be partnering with the touring artist.
That is correct.
Great. And then for fees, one person is asking, I use a 2-tiered system with discounts for rural and underserved communities and a block booking discount when there are multiple bookings. I'm not entirely sure, Carrie, what your question is here. If you could add a little more context, if you're wondering how that would work with the South Dakota Arts Council, but if you could help me clarify that question in the Q&A, that would be great. And then from Rose, what is the range awarded to each artist as they're applying?
There isn't a range. Each of the artists that apply in your budget area, you are able to include what you are physically able to do as far as a tour is concerned, how many bookings you plan out for 1 year. Let's just say for 1 year, how many shows you plan to do, and the cost, an average cost or an average fee for each one of those shows. That's how you create your budget. And that also helps you to find out what the amount that you're going to request. So it's up to the applicant to determine within their budget what they are requesting for support from the South Dakota Arts Council. So there's quite a range. Some artists maybe are only interested in doing 6 shows a year at X fee, and some will do 24 shows at X a fee. It all depends on what the applicant proposes.
Great, thank you. And then Carrie, yes, to answer your question, the 2-tiered system for your fees, she's just making sure that having a 2-tiered system works with the process, but really it doesn't matter what they negotiate for their fee with the presenting organization. Whatever fee they negotiate with the presenter, then they just submit that on their contract with the Arts Council, correct?
Absolutely. It is a negotiated fee. So we are just supporting the artist in working with the venue. So if they've got other fees and other tiered systems and things like that, that's completely fine with us. That's on the artist and the venue. And then however we can support that eligible sponsor with that artist is yes is the answer. That is something that we'll be able to help with. Our contract is just essentially a request for payment out of their awarded funds. I hope
Great.
that helped.
Fantastic. Well, please keep submitting questions as we continue, but I think we'll jump back up now to the Artists in Schools and Communities program, and we'll have some Q&A time specifically for that, and then also again just some general if a question jogs your memory in a moment. So let me jump back up the slides here for you, Rebecca. There we go.
Thank you, and I'm sorry I dropped off of the Zoom for a few minutes there, and appreciate you covering, Sarah and Andrew. So I'll go through the Artists in Schools and Communities program overview and application process for you all. The Artists in Schools and Communities program is our teaching artist residency program for South Dakota schools, community organizations, and other nonprofit organizations through South Dakota. This program is open to artists from out of state. The work must occur within the state. So what is a teaching artist residency? A teaching artist is an artist educator who's able to translate their creative process into an instructional setting. We don't require any sort of certification or training for teaching artists in South Dakota. We do offer those opportunities, but it's not a requirement to apply for this program. Teaching artists represent all arts disciplines, and they're an invaluable resource for schools and communities that really greatly contribute to arts learning across South Dakota. So some of the examples of what a teaching artist might be doing intersecting with communities and school organizations are short or long-term in-school and after-school residencies, arts integration programs with organizations or schools, curriculum-based projects using K-12 arts or non-arts education standards, maybe doing residency work that is supporting science standards or math standards, core arts instruction in an artist specialized discipline, professional development for educators, medical professionals, or others, and also lifelong learning in the arts through community events, classes, and workshops. Next slide, please, Andrew. We just have a few images from past residencies. You'll see we have an outdoor community mural project that's happening. This photo in the bottom right is a music residency with a cultural musical ensemble, and then a dance residency that occurred at an organization for people with disabilities. Next slide, please. So how are teaching artists compensated? So here's a really big difference between these two programs. Teaching artists through the Artists in Schools and Communities residency program are paid through our grants from the South Dakota Arts Council, but those grants are going to the community organization, the nonprofit organization that has applied to host the residency. So instead of this grant going to an artist and you managing that budget like you would in the touring arts program, these grants go to the organizations. They select the artists from this roster. The Artists in Schools and Communities program requires that residencies last for a minimum of 1 week, but they may last for up to a full semester. Artists are paid a set weekly fee and reimbursed or provided most travel accommodations. The weekly fee for individual artists on our roster is $1,600 per week. For ensembles or duos, those artists are paid $2,600 per week. The South Dakota Arts Council provides grants to the sponsoring organization that include half of the artist's fee, so that would be $800 per week from us, plus the travel, the round trip mileage, or sometimes it's airfare if you're coming from out of state, and from the artist's hometown to the residency community, unless you're working within your own community, and then mileage is not provided. The sponsoring organization is required to match the grant funds for the artist's fee. And then they're also required to provide motel lodging or another agreed upon accommodation if you're traveling outside of your home community. Sometimes, especially in very small rural communities in South Dakota, hotels are not the best option. They may invite you to stay in somebody's home or have an apartment or something like that. what we require is that they run that past the artist and the artist agrees that that's a suitable accommodation for them. The sponsor is also responsible for purchasing residency supplies or reimbursing the artist for consumable supplies. However, that works based on the artist's preference and expertise. That should be worked out in the residency planning. Next slide, please, Andrew. How much work do teaching artists usually get through the AISC program? So this can really vary greatly among the artists on our roster. We do have a few artists who are basically working full-time through this program. They're receiving, 20 or 30 weeks of residency requests in a year. But I would say the majority of artists are doing about 5 to 10 weeks maybe of residencies during a year. So we do encourage artists to network and build relationships with teachers and volunteers and staff at nonprofit organizations, that you can work with them to apply for the grant to bring you in for residency work and encourage that process. Some sponsoring organizations participate in this program every single year. Some of those are bringing in different artists every year. Some are bringing in the same artists every year. So your networking does make a difference there. And we really can't stress enough that the more conversations you have about you working in the program, the more work you end up getting. The South Dakota Arts Council markets and promotes the residency program and the grant deadlines for the sponsors, but we're not able to act as an agent on behalf of the artist. Generally, we suggest that artists consider this program supplemental work to the rest of what you do as an artist. How do sponsoring organizations find artists to host for residencies? So we have a website that includes all of the roster artists. We have separate pages for touring artists and teaching artists. And you'll have a space on that page where you will have an app or a roster artist profile. So that will have your image, an explanation of the kind of work that you do, and people can go through and read those artist profiles to decide which artist they would like to request. Sponsoring organizations will need to apply to host artists in residency. Applications are accepted January 1 through March 1 from those sponsoring organizations every year. So if you are on the teaching artist roster, you'll know whatever organizations you want to work with, you need to encourage them to get their applications in during that time period. In the application form, sponsors are asked to select their preferred artists and then 2 alternate artist choices. So that's how you'll receive your request in order of preference, depending on if the first artist can accept the residency or not. Artists are endorsed, are featured on that website. You will write your own profile and then we'll help develop that if it needs a little bit of work. And then the Artists in Schools and Communities program only provides grant funds for residency work with artists who are on this roster. Next slide, please, Andrew. Here's one example of an artist write-up on our website. You'll see that this artist talks a little bit about what she's done in the past, a little bit of her bio, and then what her residency includes, has contact information and an image of her. You can visit this website to see more examples of artist profiles on our website. We will have a new website coming hopefully relatively soon, within the next year or so. Sarah's working really hard on redeveloping that. So these will be updated, but for now, this is what we have. Next slide, please, Andrew. Teaching artists' responsibilities and workflow. So what we ask of teaching artists, first of all, we give you all the flexibility to review every request that comes in for you and decide if you want to accept or decline it. Artists will need to engage in residency planning with the project director at the organization at least 2 months ahead of the residency start date. So generally, artists do this via email or phone. Some artists like to do a site visit in advance. That's totally up to you to design your planning process. Artists are also responsible for completing the sponsor artist agreements. This is a contract between you and the sponsoring organization that we prepare at the South Dakota Arts Council and send out to you electronically for your signature. You may have to do some payment documents for the organization, a W-9 or something like that that they require at the org, but our requirements are just this one document for the artist to complete. During the residency, we ask that artists spend no more than 20 contact hours on arts instruction, whether that's with students, staff, or public presentations. And then about 10 hours per week are spent in residence, where artists are focusing on their own work during that time. And the sponsor should provide a space to accommodate that work. Often that may be in a public space so that community members can kind of filter through and see you in action working on your own work, maybe ask some questions, but no more than 20 hours teaching, 10 hours in residence. When artists are not in residence, you just do your normal thing, and you can do any other contract work outside of this program. We don't have any restrictions on how that works. We also provide opportunities for professional development and funding for professional development for roster artists. So the required application materials are that first you complete an applicant profile in the GoSmart online system. If you've applied for past SDAC grants, your profile is already there. You can just log in and then start on this application. There's a grant narrative, no more than 5 pages. The questions are pretty specific to arts education, and you will find a sample of those narrative questions, a template for those in the applicant portal. I really encourage everybody to look at that, maybe even start it before you go into the grant system, because you can get an idea of how you'll answer those questions. You also need a residency plan with also no more than 5 pages. So what this should be is a 1-week residency plan that includes your objectives, sequential learning activities, and a list of supplies and approximate costs. And then you'll also want to explain how that residency would be adapted for longer timeframes and also varying age groups. If you have only a specific age group you'd like to work with, you can note that in your application. Also, you'll need a resume, no more than 2 pages. You don't need to list everything you've ever done. We only need information relevant to what would be a teaching artist. So your artistic experience and maybe experience working with the public, with children, with any groups of people that would be useful information for us to review for this application. Also, artistic documentation and support materials. So this is really important. It often gets overlooked by artists. What Sarah and I will both say is don't skimp in this area. Supply all of the supporting materials that you are allowed to supply. So that's 10 work samples. This is samples of your own work as an artist, and it can also be, articles about you working. It can be reviews, other educational material that you put together or anything like that. But please supply the full amount that you're able to supply there. We need references for this program. We're sending you into work in schools and possibly with vulnerable populations. So we definitely will be checking references. And for artists in schools and communities, you also need at least 1 letter of support that talks about you working as an artist in a teaching capacity. This does not have to be from a reference. It can be from any representative of an organization who you've had that experience with before, but they don't have to be also listed as your reference. So, questions about the AISC program?
Let's see, none have filtered in quite yet. I think we'll probably have some more coming in, but I know from a personal standpoint, I please correct me if I'm wrong, but when I'm trying to think about the differences between these 2 programs, I kind of the touring artist is really driven from the artist, as far as the artist is the one doing the booking, reaching out to the venue, whereas the artists in schools and communities is a little bit more presenter driven. I mean, it's obviously still very active for the artist, but it's the presenting organization saying, we would like to work with this artist, submitting that information to the Arts Council. So the artist is still developing those relationships with the organization. But I always kind of think of that. So it's not the artist submitting saying, I'm going to go work at this organization for this residency. It's the organization requesting, correct?
Right, that's correct, Andrew. So the artists just apply for the roster, and then the rest of the application process comes from the sponsoring organization that will request to host the artist.
Great. And then one other thing that we'll include in the follow-up email is when it comes to the artistic documentation, this last spring, we hosted a number of webinars for folks applying for artist grants and some of the organizational grants. And there were some great tips and tricks from some past panelists and some past applicants on kind of the best ways to submit some of your artistic documentation and some of the things that the panelists really look for, which would be very applicable to this grant as well. So I'll include a link to some of those past sessions. And then a couple of other questions that have come in from Rose. Could you share some more about the professional development opportunities that you referenced?
Sure. So we do usually provide, I do an orientation process for new artists to the roster, but generally we'll have at least one professional development event in a calendar year. Often it's in conjunction with our statewide arts conference when that occurs every other year, or it may be online. But we also have a grant available specifically for teaching artists that is for them to seek any professional development they want. It's a non-matching grant of up to $1,000. So you can attend any professional development opportunities occurring throughout the state or nation or world, I guess, if $1,000 will help you do that.
Great. So now a couple of questions that I'm kind of wrapping into one here, but for folks that are new in the Artists in Schools and Communities roster, you know, are there a list or some past resources of organizations that have used the program before, that have hosted residencies, to kind of see, you know, is it only schools? Is it only healthcare centers and schools? Just to see the type of organizations that they can collaborate with, but also to reach out if they're new and propose an idea to a past organization that's maybe familiar with the program. So they're only having to kind of convince them, hey, I'd be a great fit, instead of also explaining the Artists in Schools and Communities program.
Well, we do have a list of all of our past grantees. Those are in our annual reports, which are all accessible on our website. So you could pull a list of every grantee organization of the South Dakota Arts Council and know that those are all eligible organizations. But any registered 501c3 nonprofit in South Dakota is an eligible presenting organization, as are units of government. So and those are who participate in these programs. So it might be a school, it might be an arts council, it might be a city recreation department, a library. Sanford Cancer Center does a ton of residency work with us. We give them about usually 40 weeks of residencies in a year. The Susie Kappa Art Center is one in Rapid City that's very active, does about 35 weeks of residency in a year. So it really varies, but the only restrictions are that they're a nonprofit or unit of government who's eligible to receive these grant funds. They cannot be for-profit businesses or anything like that. So you can't go to the bar that you perform in and give them a grant for your performance. They have to pay you separately out of their own budget.
Great. Well, a couple of additional questions have come up about touring arts, but is there anything before we jump back to some of those questions in general Q&A that you'd like to address?
Andrew, would you just jump down to the second to last slide so that we can have that on there? There we go. Just so people can see, we wanted to really call attention to this. We have collected resources in our applicant portals to assist artists with your application process. There are separate portals for each program. You really want to go through the material in those portals, because that guides you right through the process and includes information specific to each program. So the Touring Arts applicant portal is linked there. So is the Artists in Schools and Communities one. They're also posted right on the front of our website and right on the front of each of those programs if you link into those. please make sure you look at the guide to grants. That has all of the application instructions, plus review criteria, program descriptions, and a guide for your work samples. And then there are sample applications and templates to help you prepare your materials. And there are even tutorials for the online grant system in which you'll be applying. So, you know, if you're struggling with that system at all, you can just go and watch videos on how to operate that. Sarah, did you have anything you wanted to add with regard to those portals or resources?
I don't have anything. I don't know if you asked me that, Rebecca, but
I did,
Great.
but thank you.
Great. Well, Sarah, a couple of other questions for the touring arts funding. Are those one, and this might, so for the touring arts funding, are the payments only distributed by check or is direct deposit available? Do you know?
oh yes, that's up to the recipient.
Great.
They can choose to do that when they send in their grant agreements after they've been awarded.
And then do you have any recommendations, one of the artists who does the booking with the presenters, do you have any recommendations or tips and tricks of what other artists have used when they're discussing the funding with the presenting organization? So for instance, you know, from my perspective, having been a touring artist before, sometimes we'd say, you know, we really need X amount to make it there. We have this touring arts funding available to us and we have, you know, this much of that we would feel comfortable using. Would you be able to cover this rest amount? You know, so basically saying this is our full fee. We can give you this kind of discounted rate because of our touring arts relationship. Can we make this work? Is that kind of the general approach that you see?
Yes, you nailed it, Andrew. You know, that's one of those things that you can use as incentive to help book at a venue. Sometimes we will see nonprofits that don't use the funding. Maybe they have sponsors, maybe they have, so yes, you just explained it very well. I don't think I need any further explanation.
And it is nice. Sometimes that is the way to kind of, it's, you know, we're kind of helping them out, say, you know, it would cost you this much, but now it's only this, you know, you're to the old, you know, 75% off kind of, you know, fire sale approach, I think, to presenting. Great. Then another question from one of the potential artists is, they also collaborate with someone that does summer reading programs at libraries. Is that eligible for either the touring arts or the artisan schools and communities?
Most of the, I mean, the library is a 501c3, I should say tax exempt. So many of the libraries are you know, they're under their city government entities, so they would be eligible for touring arts. Mm-hmm.
Sarah, I'm looking at this question and it's a summer reading program. So if it's not an arts program, that the library would be eligible for a touring artist, but it would have to be an arts program.
Yep.
Right. There is a South Dakota Humanities Council program that does a similar touring program that's you know, more humanities related activities. So I'd maybe suggest looking into that if it's not an arts program.
Great.
But if the presenter is an author and presenting their own work, then that might fall in line. I've seen a couple of questions like this, Andrew, about people wanting to kind of talk through their ideas, and we are more than willing to do that. You can send us emails with kind of a roundup of what you're looking to do, and we'll respond. So if you have specific questions about what you're wanting to do, feel free to reach out to Sarah for touring arts and me for artisan schools and communities. We're more than happy to help walk you through or talk through those ideas.
And
sure.
That's one thing I remember discussing when we were talking about the spring grant applications. Is one thing that's so nice is because a panel really reviews these and it's not the staff that's making the final determining decisions. It's really nice because you can give all the advice in the world. You know, the Arts Council staff really wants you to send in the best application possible that really presents your program in the best light. And so it's really nice from someone who's written a number of grants to the Arts Council for organizations and individually. It's really great to be able to communicate with the staff and get some really clear answers, and they don't have to hedge their bets. You know, they can really give you some good advice because the panel is the one that makes the ultimate determination. Great. Well, you've answered all of the questions, it looks like, coming in, and just wanted to say thank you again so much to Sarah and Rebecca for your time today. Oh, actually, can you quick remind everyone, when is the application for this fall session due?
September 4th. You have through the day of September 4th. You have to click submit before midnight.
Great. And coming from personal experience with other grants as well, I highly encourage pressing submit a couple hours before midnight in case there are any issues with your submission. But it's good to know you've got that those last few minutes of the day. One other quick question that came in: is there any age limit for instructors? I did see that you have to be 18 plus. Is that the only limit?
You must be an adult, and that's the only limit. Other than you cannot have student status.
And then one last question with that deadline was just, is it midnight Central Time? I
think it converts to your time zone, but don't quote me on that because it's an online system and they all confuse me. But I think it converts to your time zone.
But to be safe, I would go for 10:59 if you're Mountain.
Right.
Oh yes, good. Kate just jumped in the
oh, thank you, Kate.
Chat, and she did say it is 11:59 p.m. Central. So
okay.
Yep. Great. Thanks for jumping in, Kate. Great. Well, so thank you again so much to Rebecca and Sarah. If any of you have any questions, please reach out to them. We'll be sending the recording along with the slides and any links within about a day to you all, so you can reference this again later. And also, just if you have any other ideas for any professional development webinars that would be helpful to you, please reach out to me, and reach out to any of us at Arts South Dakota if we can be of any service to the great creative work that you're all doing throughout the state. So thank you all again, and thank you to Rebecca and Sarah, and we'll see you all really soon.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.